So did the church fathers teach relative identity? Now, this is brought up a lot by Muslims who claim that the church fathers did not teach relative identity, and so bringing up relative identity is changing the original statements that is taught in Nicene Trinitarianism. Is this true? Well, let me give you a quick example before we really get into this. Let's say one of your friends, you're arguing with one of your friends, and you do something he doesn't like, and he says, do that again and I'll leave, right? He's threatening to leave your house if you do that again. Now, take that and try to put it into a formal language, formal system, right? You'll take the do that again and, right? There's a connective there, and I'll leave. If you were to translate the and directly into the formal languages and conjunction, you would get do that again, conjunction, and I'll leave, right? But that's clearly not what he means, right? What he means is something like do that again implies I'll leave, right? If you do that again, then, or the consequence of that is I'll leave, which is not conjunction. And so the reason I bring this up is to demonstrate that informal language statements do not automatically map onto formal language statements, right? If just by saying and, it doesn't automatically force me into conjunction, and just by saying is does not automatically force me into identity as a, formal, logical two-place predicate. It can be that is of predication, as people normally distinguish identity and predication, or the is of identity. And so when we say, did the church fathers teach relative identity? Well, the church fathers didn't teach any formal system, right? Formal systems were really produced at around the end of the 19th century by Frege and others like Bertrand Russell. They didn't teach any formal system. They weren't working with formal conjunction, disjunction, implication, any of that. And so when someone says the informal language statement like the 7 statements of the Trinity, the Father is God, Son is God, Holy Spirit is God, they are not each other, there is one God, they're saying, well, you're changing the Father is God, the Son is God to the Father is the same God as the Son, right? And they're saying, well, we have this original Nicene statement, and you're altering that into saying something it didn't say. And actually what you're saying as a relative identity theorist is you can't say the Son is God, just simpliciter. That is completely false. As an informal language statement, we of course affirm that. Not only can we say it, we affirm it. Of course, the Son is God, simpliciter. The Father is God, simpliciter. The Holy Spirit is God, simpliciter. Of course, we affirm that. The difference is that when we say, are we using absolute or relative identity, we are now moving into formal systems, right? Formal systems interpret the informal language statements. They don't automatically map onto it, right? Again, just by saying and does not mean conjunction. Just by saying is does not mean identity, which is why we have multiple models of the Trinity. There can be multiple models of the Trinity, just like there's multiple models of almost anything, right? Any set of statements is going to have multiple models, most likely. And so we are not altering anything from Nicene Trinitarianism. Rather, this is just a confusion of language, right? It's a very common confusion. People think that you can sort of intuit your way just from the natural language statement to the formal language statement. But once you get into a formal language, there's a lot more commitments than the informal language statement is going to give you. And what matters then is whether or not the truth conditions are being preserved, right? When we say, are we changing the original statement from, the Son is God to the Son is the same God as the Father, what really matters is, are the truth conditions being preserved, right? What can be said true of the Son is God? Is that preserved when we formalize it in the relative identity statement? Yes, it is completely preserved. And that's the whole point of it. The relative identity theorist is not trying to distort the original statements. Rather, they're trying to preserve the original statement's meaning into a system in a way that can form a consistent model.